I'm going to start with an intro of our speaker, who is Ellen Pinder. She is the Emergency Management Coordinator for the Charlotte County Emergency Management Office. During disaster times, Ellen takes on the key role of coordinating logistical needs of the county for processes like moving critical supplies, deploying essential staff, and implementing plans and the processes that she is constantly helping to develop and practice. She has been awarded the Public Safety Employee of the Year and the Silver Star Award for her contributions to emergency management. And she has also earned the certification of Florida Professional Emergency Manager from the Florida Emergency Preparedness Association. So we're really excited to have her here today. And with that, Ellen, I will let you take it away.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for tuning in today. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the 2023 hurricane season. Again, I'm from Charlotte County Emergency Management, and it is not just me. We have 5 other people in our department as well. We have our director, Patrick Fuller, who has been with us for quite some time. And then we have our 3 planning specialists, Ashlyn Gamble, Bradley Geelan, and Brandon Watkins. All of us are professional emergency managers, and we are here to support our community and hopefully get you guys some information today from this presentation. We learned a lot this past year with the hurricane season, right? Many of you probably were here for Hurricane Ian or just moved after Hurricane Ian and have heard from your neighbors what the event was like. This year coming up in 2023, one of the biggest questions that we have is how many hurricanes are we going to have, right? The National Weather Service, they always do their predictions every year. And this year they talked about 14 storms, right? It's supposed to be an average storm season. Well, the main thing that I want to remind you of is it doesn't matter if it's an average storm season. In 1992, Hurricane Andrew struck Florida, and it was a very devastating storm. And that was an average year. So it doesn't matter if it's average or if we're in El Nino or La Nina. Yes, that does change things, but we just need one impact, right? And we saw that last year with Hurricane Ian. All of those other storms didn't matter to us because they didn't impact us. It just needs to be that one that does hit us. So today we're going to kind of talk about the storms that have impacted Charlotte County and the effects on those things and some of those things that you can do as a resident to be better prepared in the next coming hurricane season. Let's talk a little bit about Hurricane Ian, right? So September 28th, that was a big change for a lot of us. If you, like me, were here during Hurricane Charlie, this is the second Category 4 hurricane that you had been a part of. And if you were new to it, hopefully you were prepared or you evacuated. But it made landfall on September 28th as the Category 4 storm. Now, I know that there is some confusion because a lot of times people are like, hey, this was a Category 5 storm or this. Whenever it made landfall, it was a Category 4 storm. So that is what it has been categorized by the National Weather Service. It is tied for the 5th largest landfalling storm in U.S. history, but it is the 3rd costliest. This storm was a very slow-moving storm. So if you were there through the storm, it was very different compared to Hurricane Charlie. It was very, very slow. It was 12 to 18 feet, and it had 12 to 18 feet of storm surge from Bonita Beach to Inglewood Beach. Now, here in Charlotte County, we didn't see as much storm surge. We got more of that wind, whereas Lee County, they got a lot of that storm surge, which you saw in a lot of those videos, and we'll show within this presentation some of that storm surge that they had. But because that storm was a slow moving storm, we really just constantly had that wind and that rain, and it caused a lot of different damage because, you know, we were already saturated before the storm. And then here we have this storm just saturating even more. And then we're having constant wind and then that wind driven rain where it's going in and causing damages, getting into the roofs and affecting our drywall and things like that a little bit differently. So this storm was very different than Hurricane Charlie. If the track had deviated 20 miles, just 20 miles, we would have had a very different story, right? We would have been, had a lot of the same damages, a lot of the same storm surge that Lee County experienced and even Collier County experienced. And that is the reason why we make those evacuation decisions, because a lot of your homes are built to withstand wind, but it's not built to protect you from that storm surge. And we live in this beautiful paradise right on the water, right? We all want to live on the water in sunny Florida. And because of the way our coastline is built here in Florida, we have that higher risk of that higher storm surge. So we want to make sure that we evacuate you. Look in all the areas that you live. You're in lower lying lands, and we want to make sure that we're protecting you. So we're going to evacuate you, not for wind, but usually for water. However, there is some differences on some of those other structures that we'll talk about a little bit later on in the presentation on why we evacuate those, even if they are in safer zones. But 20 miles. So 20 miles is a big, big difference in what we would have experienced, but it's a very small distance, right? 20 miles is just over the bridge for many of us here in our community, and that is all we needed to be able to have such a huge impact here. And there was widespread damage throughout all of Charlotte County, and even though it varied in different areas, we saw that there was a difference in the areas that were impacted by Hurricane Charlie and were rebuilt and mitigated. And we'll kind of talk about that as we go through this presentation on the updated building codes and structures and things like that, and how we have learned from these storms. So these storms, even though they are horrific, we do learn from them, and we are continuing to grow as a community and be more resilient. And hopefully this presentation will help you be better resilient for the next storm. Hurricane Ian versus Charlie, right? We get a lot of times people are asking us to compare those two storms. Similar winds, we had 150 mile per hour for Ian. We had 150 mile per hour wind speed for Charlie, right? So, that's not too big of a difference in the wind speeds because they both were Category 4 storms. The wind extents was 45 miles per hour versus 20 miles per hour, right? Or 20 miles. So here we have Ian. I mean, if you look at that picture, Ian is taking up all of the state of Florida, right? Where Charlie, it's a much, much smaller storm. So it's that wind extent really just isn't as big as Ian was. Then that eye wall, right? You really see in Ian, that's that nice big, that 20-mile eye wall where, you're having that eye go through, whereas Charlie, with it being a smaller storm, you only have that 5-mile eye wall diameter. And a lot of times people, they say, oh, you can't really see the eye, and none of, it's whenever there's a storm, you need to make sure that you're not going out into the storm, even if you think that it has passed, until you know for sure, because 20 miles, that's a pretty big eye wall. You go out for a few minutes and come back in, you could put yourself in harm by going out in the middle of that storm. Now, this is where it really makes a big difference between the two storms, right? Is that forward movement, 8 miles per hour. That's how slow Hurricane Ian was. It was moving 8 miles per hour. So it was a very slow moving storm, where Charlie was 20 miles per hour. So in 8 hours, Charlie was able to start at Charlotte County and then move all the way across Florida, right? It came into the harbor and it moved all the way across Florida in 8 hours. Whereas Hurricane Ian just sat here and continued to hit our coast for much longer, for that same 8-hour period, when Hurricane Charlie, that much smaller, more compact storm, really kind of just moved across the state of Florida. Storm surge in some areas of Florida was impacted with 10 to 15 feet of storm surge, whereas Hurricane Charlie, it was around 4 to 7 feet in some areas. So even the impacts of the storm surge was different, because if you look at the formation of that storm, you didn't really have that big wind, where it's able to, it didn't have that big arm to pull up that water up over the coast to really bring up that storm surge and continue to have it build on our coastlines. A lot of rain with Hurricane Ian, because again, that storm just had that chance to just build and build and build over top of us and continue to churn. So we got that 10 to 15 inches of rain, whereas In Hurricane Charlie, it's only 4 to 6 inches. Still a good amount of rain with both of the storms, and still a very similar path. So even though they're two hurricanes and two category for hurricanes, you can tell the impacts were very different, and how they went through our community was very different. Even though they took a very similar path and all those things, some of our area weren't even impacted by Hurricane Charlie because it was a much smaller storm, whereas Hurricane Ian was a much larger storm, so it was able to do widespread damage throughout Charlotte County. Key takeaways, right? No two storms are the same, right? If you have children, none of your children are the same, right? Every single one of them are unique, and that's the same thing with storms. It doesn't matter if it's a Category 1 storm and it hit in September. Well, now we have another Category 1 storm and it hit in September. No, every single storm is different. So that's why we need to make sure that we're tuning in to local emergency management and local officials to make sure that we're heeding those warnings and that we're having those conversations. Because right here is a good example on why you need to make sure you take that seriously. Because Category 4 storm, Hurricane Charlie didn't bring this kind of storm surge. This is the same area, and time elapsed, and you start at 10:38 a.m. and by 3 o'clock in the morning, you can't see any of those structures because they are underwater. Again, category does not equal storm surge. I know a lot of times in the past, they would say, okay, Category 1 had this much storm surge, and this is what you need to do. The categories have been broken away from the National Weather Service because they are now able to do storm surge modeling, and they realize that a Category 4 storm doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have this amount of storm surge, and a Category 1, you're going to have a minimal amount of storm surge. It really just depends on, the structure of the storm, how fast it's moving, those different types of things. There's a lot of factors that play into that. So don't just say, oh, well, it's a Category 1 storm, so I don't have to worry about it because it's a littler storm. No, you really need to, again, listen to those public officials and make sure that whatever warnings they have, if they tell you to, take shelter or evacuate or those things, make sure that you listen to those requests. Again, we're hiding from wind and running from water, right? We're not worried about that wind whenever we have a hurricane, unless you are in one of those modular structures or you're in a building that was not built up to code. And that's the only time that we are going to start looking at those places where we would evacuate, or if you were on a barrier island. So people on barrier islands, obviously we are going to evacuate them, even if we don't have the surge and things like that. We may evacuate them in those instances just because we don't want them to be landlocked if there is a disaster, and we want to make sure that we're doing the best and safest for our residents. So water accounts for 88% of storm deaths, right? So unfortunately, what happens is a lot of times people, they have this misconception that, hey, I stayed during the last hurricane. A lot of people here believe that they lived through a major storm whenever Hurricane Irma came through. Well, Hurricane Irma was off the coast, right? We didn't even get hit by that storm, but a lot of people were like, well, I lived through Irma. It really was nothing. It wasn't that big of a deal. I can stay. And that's not how we need to look at it. It doesn't matter if last time you stayed at the storm and you were okay, that storm again may be different. And we want to make sure that if we are evacuating you, it's because you are in an area that is in storm surge. If that storm would have been that 20 miles further up, like we had thought, our red zones and our orange zones would have been impacted. So we want to make sure that our residents have that time to be able to get to someplace safe. So, all right, understanding your risk, right? Let's talk about this again. We talked about the structures, right? We talked about where do you live, okay? If you lived in a hardened structure that was built after 2010, okay, you have some of the newest building codes that we have here in Florida, right? And that's what we build to. We build to the Uniform Florida Building Code. And in 1992, the 1992 hurricane season really changed building codes, right? They really changed how we looked at infrastructure and how we are building things to make sure that they are hardened properly and that we mitigated a lot of the things that happened to those structures in the Andrew era of hurricane, because Miami had a lot of destruction, even though those homes were newer homes and things like that. And it's because of the way the homes were built. So they updated the buildings codes. Then in 2004 and 2005, we had another big hurricane season, right? So we had that hurricane season. Then guess what? They updated that infrastructure and that building code even higher. And then obviously in 2010, we had it again. And then I'm sure we'll see some changes here now that we've had a major impact of another storm. We'll start looking at it and start continuing to mitigate and grow and be able to make our community more resilient. So knowing when your structure was built is really important, right? I live in a 1975 farmhouse, so I know that my house isn't built up to the certain codes that would protect me from wind and water and those different types of things. And I also live in a red zone. So I know that I live in an area that is going to be impacted by not only storm surge, but riverine flooding because of where I live. So I have two risks. So knowing that is really important, and knowing when your home was built and what type of structure it is, what type of roof it is, and those types of things that you need to know to make sure, like, hey, is my home protected? Do I have shutters on my home? Do I have impact windows? Those different types of things like that. What kind of hazards do I have in my yard that could potentially become projectiles towards my home that I may need to move inside my house? Do my neighbors have projectiles in their yards? Do I maybe need to work with my neighbor to help them get those items in their home as well? What is your evacuation zone, right? I already said that I'm in red zone. Do you know what zone you live in? If you live in Charlotte County, it's very easy for you to find out. You can just go to Know Your Zone Charlotte County, put in your address, and it'll let you know very quickly if you live in a red zone, an orange zone, a yellow zone, green zone. If you live in a purple zone, you're probably a cow. So kudos to you for being able to get on Zoom today. But other than that, making sure you know what zone you're in is very important, because whenever we call for an evacuation, if you're in a red zone, you're more than likely going to be evacuated if we have risk for storm surge, or if you're in a modular home or a structure that's built outside of those updated building codes. What special considerations, right? Do you have pets? Do you have somebody with a medical disability? Do you have somebody that can't drive or is on oxygen? Those different types of things that you have to consider. That is an additional risk. If you have small children or somebody that's medically dependent, that may change you deciding whether it's safe enough for you to shelter in place or whether you should evacuate. So looking at that and deciding as a family and having those conversations, call those public officials, those different types of things, reach out to your local emergency management office, have that conversation with them and say, hey, this is what's going on in my family. What can we do to help have a good emergency plan in the event of a disaster, right? Talking about insurance, one of those big things a lot of us struggled with. I know I was right there with you about, insurance, right? Are you adequately insured? Our office is not going to be able to give you advice on that. That is not our subject matter expertise, but go to those people that do have that knowledge and those types of things and ask those questions. Like, hey, am I going to be covered if sewage were to backflow into my house, if I was to get flooding, if I was going to have this type of the wind driven rain that gets into the soffit, those different types of things. Have those conversations with an insurance professional. That way you can make sure that you're adequately insured. A lot of times people think, well, hey, FEMA is going to be able to make us whole. But remember, the biggest check that FEMA can write is $37,000. That's it. That's not going to make you whole. And, you're definitely not going to be able to rebuild a house or do any of those types of things. So you definitely want to make sure you're okay. And we had over 55,000 people make claims here in Charlotte County. And maybe 1/3 of them got a check in some form, not necessarily up to that rate. It's usually around $4,000. So $4,000 definitely isn't going to be able to make you whole again. It might be able to replace the food that you lost in the refrigerator and some of those types of items, and at least get you through until you're able to, in a hotel or something like that, until you're able to get somebody in to mitigate your home. Making a plan, right? Will you evacuate, and how? Okay, so are you going to evacuate, and what's your plan? Are you going to, go to another area of the county that's safer? Somebody that lives in a hardened structure, that lives in a green zone? Do you know somebody in a county that's not on the coast? Are you planning on going further up the state? Those different types of things, and that's going to change when you should evacuate, right? A lot of times people are like, oh, well, I'm going to leave the state. So then you need to plan to evacuate much, much earlier. Don't wait until 24 hours before the storm. Start having that conversation several days before the storm, before we even make that call. That way you can make sure that you can get out of the state safely. However, what we encourage people to do is look at those other areas that are at outside of the risk for storm surge, and go into those areas that have hardened structures that are built over 2010. And that way, then you can stay in place with a friend or something like that. If you do plan on staying in a hotel, again, check when that hotel was built, those kind of things. Where is it in the event if that community gets hit by storm surge? Those kind of things, to make sure that wherever you do evacuate, you're going to make sure that you're going to the safer option. Sheltering options, right? Sheltering here in Southwest Florida is we have a sheltering deficit. So that means that we have more people that require sheltering than we have shelter space. And that's because here over on this coast, we don't have those big arenas. We don't have those big things, because as taxpayers, those aren't the kind of things that we want, right? We want open pickleball courts and open parks, and we want boat ramps and those kind of things, because the reason why we moved to our coast is because we want to be out there. We want to be outside. We want to be in the water and those types of things. So we have those facilities for our residents, but we don't have a lot of structure for shelters. And the reason why is because we've built all our homes next to water, right? We have all of our homes near water because that's where we want to live. And guess where we build our schools? We build our schools right next to water as well, because that's where we want to live, right? And that's where we want to bring our children to school. We don't want to drive 45 minutes to bring them on the other side of 75. So we do have sheltering options here in Charlotte County, but we do ask that you look at other options and use those as a last resort. So look at other options. Do you have other places to go that are safe for you to be and to shelter in place through the storm? That way you can be with your family and more comfortable. In a shelter, you are in congregate sheltering. So it is you with other residents of the county. So we don't have segregated areas where each family can have their own special place and those kind of things. You are allowed to bring your pets here in Charlotte County. We do have pet friendly shelters. All of our shelters are pet friendly, so you can bring them, but they do not cohabitate with you in the shelter. So there's a section for the pets, and then there's a sections for all of our residents to stay in. That way we are making sure we're thinking of the safety of the pets, because there are a lot of pets that do have anxiety and those kind of things. And we want to make sure that they also have a safe place to stay. You still are allowed to feed and water and walk your pets, and up until the tropical storm force winds. So we do have a program for our pets and our people. So we want to make sure that you guys have a safe place to go. But again, try to look for another plan. That way that shelter space is reserved for those people that don't have any other options. So if you do have an option to get out and get somewhere and go be safe somewhere else, we do encourage that. That way you don't have to be put into congregate sheltering. You are, with friends or with your family, or you're on the other side of the state, enjoying the sunshine over there while, we're just making sure that our residents stay here safe in Charlotte County. All right, how are you going to communicate, right? We saw that after Hurricane Ian. We lost a lot of communication. We found that text was the best way for communication. It did take a long time to get those texts through, but text was still the most important part of communication. And that's why it's really important to have this plan and make this plan and then communicate it to your family members before the storm, right? This is what's going to happen if we lose communication. This is where we're going to go, right? Don't make this plan and then never tell your family, because what's going to happen is we're going to get calls, public safety is going to get calls, and 911 is going to get calls because your family members are worried about you, right? They can't get a hold of you. So make sure you have that plan. And then what's the most important thing that you're going to bring whenever you evacuate? You don't need that, everything in your house, right? But you do need to have those important papers, those important documents, pictures, those kind of things. And a great way to do it is to be able to save that stuff either on a flash drive or, a hard drive or something like that. That way it makes it a little easier, or you could even put it in the cloud. Okay, preparing. All right, so building that kit, right? We are getting into a season where we are going to have the tax-free, the disaster preparedness tax holiday. So you want to make sure that you have those supplies on hand and get those together. You can go to ready.gov /kit, and they have some great tips and tricks for you to be able to build your own kit. Now, remember, pharmacies, 30 days before a storm, get with your doctor and get them to have any of those prescriptions. That way, if they can write you a prescription for 30 days for any of those maintenance meds and things like that. That way you can get those right before the storm, because you don't want to start the storm and say, oh, well, I only have a couple of weeks worth of medications. No, you want to make sure that you have those in case, infrastructure is down and we don't have those pharmacies and things available as readily available as we would during blue skies. Again, talking about building that kit, having enough food, having enough water. Do you have a radio? What other type of items do you need? First aid kits, pet care items, those different types of things. There's going to be a lot of things that you may need in your kit that someone else may not. That doesn't mean that it's wrong. It just means that that's what makes your family unique. So it's important to start having those questions now and start looking at, okay, what do we really need to bring with us, or what do we need to have in the house in case we decide to shelter in place? Staying informed. All right. There's a lot of ways to stay informed. Obviously local news outlets, radio stations. Then we also have Alert Charlotte, the National Weather Service alerts, county website, social media. So the two things that I want to talk about now are Alert Charlotte. So if you go to Alert Charlotte, if you just Google Alert Charlotte, Florida, you will see a page come up and it will ask you to sign up for Alert Charlotte. I urge you to do that. And I urge you to sign up for tornadoes and hurricanes, especially because that's going to get you vital information. It will be geocoded to where you live, so it'll know what evacuation zone you're in. So if you are in evacuation order, it will give you that information. It will let you know if you are in a tornado, because it's geocoded to where you live. It'll let you know, like, hey, this is you're under a warning, you're under a watch, those different types of things. So it's really important that you sign up for it, because after the storm as well, it's an easy way for us to text or email some information to you. We can even do phone calls and TTY, but it's not something where you're going to have information solicited to you. That is not what the service is for. It is strictly for emergency communication only. And then the last thing that I'm going to talk about is one of the things that we are working on is creating information hubs at our recreation centers and our libraries after the storm. We're still formulating that plan. And what we're working on is we're trying to figure out a way is to get communication once all of our other channels of communication are down. When we don't have cell phone and people don't have internet to get on the website and those kind of things, we want to have some way to be able to get communication to people and a way for people to gather, to talk to officials and things like that, to get to know where points of distribution is open and where cooling stations and those types of things, and where resources like FEMA and the state of Florida are opening up their programs. So now what? Now you've listened to this presentation and you're like, it's not enough. I really want to learn more about emergency management, and I really want to be a more resilient community member. So more importantly, stay engaged, right? Get on our Facebook page, like it, check out our county website, really start seeing what's going on. Attend a lot of the county courses that we have throughout Charlotte County. Being a good neighbor. We're actually having CERT training today here in our facility, and we do. CERT training is a national program brought to you by FEMA. It's the Community Emergency Response Team training, and that is training where we're literally teaching you how to be a better prepared resident here in Charlotte County. It doesn't just talk about tornadoes, it talks about fire, it talks about medical emergencies, those different types of things. You can go right on our website, or you can email the email address that we're going to have at the end of this presentation to ask when and where we're going to have our next CERT training. So most importantly, avoid complacency, right? Don't be those people that during Hurricane Ian were like, hey, I'm not going to evacuate because I lived through Irma, or I was here during Hurricane Charlie. You don't want to get complacent, because remember, no two storms are the same. So you want to make sure that you are prepared and that you are listening to those public officials. We have a lot of outreach events. We work with our local libraries, rec centers, and then of course we work with our extension offices. So I'm really thankful that they had me here today. All right. Again, we're going to open it up for questions here, and here is our email address: emergency.management@charlottecountyfl.gov. And you're more than welcome to call our office Monday through Friday at 941-833-4000.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ellen. I think this is going to be great. I would certainly encourage everybody who was on or only saw half of it to check out the YouTube video once it's up and share it with everybody you know. I know I stayed during Ian, and it was certainly wild. So that being said, I am going to launch our poll right now, give everybody a chance to answer it, and then maybe throw some questions up in the chat. And once we get through all those questions, we will call it and let everybody get back to their day. I have a question for Ellen while people fill out the poll here. So as the emergency management coordinator, you clearly had to stay during Ian. I'm curious as to how that works, because clearly the county requires people to stay, but maybe that's not the safest option. I mean, you said your house was a farmhouse, so I'm curious as to how that goes down.
So I actually stay in the Emergency Operations Center. I actually lived here, I think 3 weeks. So because we have to stay as long as other people are living in the building as well. We are in a hardened structure in Charlotte County, and that is where I evacuate to. So because I have to work throughout the disaster, and that's where I come. This is where I stay. So we're housed here throughout that. Before the storm, we stay during the storm, and then we stay after the storm. And then usually the emergency management office stays longer after the storm, because we have to make sure that any of those resources, like strike teams for search and rescue and medical operations and some of those other things, that those people have a place to come to and to report information. And sometimes they have to stay as well. So we usually have a presence here in the Emergency Operations Center. And we are a 24-hour, once we are activated, we are a 24-hour office. So we have people working the clock 24 hours a day to make sure that, the fire department, the sheriff's office, the police department, all of those agencies that are also 24 hours, our dispatch department, our call center. That way they have someone that they can reach out to if they have any questions.
Does your family get to stay with you?
They do not. So I'm very lucky. So my director, his family, they actually evacuate to stay with his parents in the Northport area. I'm lucky that my other half, he actually works for the county as well, and he also works in the Emergency Operations Center. But the rest of our staff, they have plans and they have conversations with their family every year about what their options are and where they're going to evacuate and where they're going to stay and how they're going to communicate after the storm.
Do you have any thoughts? I'm not seeing any questions roll in the chat, but I know something that we dealt with a lot at the extension office. I mean, we were getting the questions about insurance, and we are also probably not the correct office to come to with that, but I was curious as to like if you had the name of the resources that would be a good place to go when navigating some of that.
So for me, so I struggled as well with insurance. My insurance company, we had a struggle, and unfortunately as well because of my job, and for many of us, right, it was very busy for me after the storm. So I did get a public adjuster, but that doesn't mean that you have to do that. Have that conversation. I also have an insurance broker. I have a person that he's not affiliated with an a specific insurance company. He's someone that, he goes out and, he's an insurance broker, right? He goes and he works with all the insurance companies, but I use him to have those conversations with, right? Because I'm not a subject matter expert. I don't know the difference between cost value and replacement value. I do, but I wouldn't have if I didn't have an insurance broker. And if you don't know the answers to that question, I urge you to go and get a have those questions, whether it's with your insurance person or a broker. That way you understand to make sure, like, okay, hey, if I do have damage to my house, are they going to give me cost value, or are they going to give me replacement value? Because that is a big difference, right? Because if my house was built in 1975, the cost to build that house in 1975 is not going to be the same cost to build that in 2023. So really understanding what it is, and I don't speak all those legalese. So reaching out to those people, reaching out to those subject matter experts that can really help you navigate through that. And that is why I went with a public adjuster, because I was like, I just don't have time to read all this documentation and have all these conversations with the insurance. Now, I'm not saying that that is the direction that you should go, and that's not a suggestion that my office is saying, hey, this is the only way you could go about it. But I am saying there are people out there that are professionals that you can reach out to.
And what about there were oh, of course, I'm struggling to remember the acronym now because I feel like it was such an alphabet soup, particularly post storm with the EOC and all of the other various acronyms. But wasn't there some sort of like recovery center or place where you could go to get help with claims like that started popping up?
Yes, there is. So there's Marks, there's MREX, there's DSNAP, there's all these kind of things, right? We're government, so we love to have the alphabet soup. But what's going to happen after a storm is, depending on what level of declaration it is, we may have FEMA come in, we may have the state of Florida, FDEM, the Florida Division of Emergency Management. We also have a very robust human services department. All of those folks are going to get together, children, Department of Children and Service, Department of Elder Affairs, Veterans Affairs. If you have alphabet soup in your title, then we're probably going to get all those people to the table, and we're going to open up these sites. That way people can have that one-stop shop, right? I need to talk to FEMA. I need to talk to the state. I need to talk to Elder Affairs. I need to talk to Child Services. I need to talk to Red Cross. I need to talk to Human Services about rent assistance. Whatever it is, we will have all of those people, the SBA, the Small Business Administration, to get loans, those different types of things. We're going to, as soon as we can work with those agencies to open up something like that, we are going to open up opportunities, whether it's a physical location or a virtual location, for people to meet those individuals and be able to work through a lot of their issues. And then we also opened up a DSNAP, and that is for you to be able to get food assistance, because there's a lot of times where after a storm, you may not have been where you needed assistance with getting food, but then after the storm you do, because now you've been displaced from work, you've been displaced from your home, so it's impacted you financially to where you need assistance. Hey, I need just an assistance for a couple of weeks or a couple of months or whatever it is, and we bring those services in as well to make sure that people are being provided food.
Wow, that's great. And I'm just taking a look at our poll here as well. I actually have a question for our participants. I'm curious as to if maybe they'll answer in the chat, because we've got every single person that has attended is in an evacuation zone. They are not in E. So I'm curious to our participants if they knew their evacuation zone prior to Ellen providing these resources. Particularly because if I scroll down and I look further, only one person evacuated for Ian. So good on whoever that was. Are you guys in a coma? Eating your lunch and now you need a nap?
Don't be shy. That happens a lot. A lot of times whenever we go out there, I've had my own family members that didn't know what zone they were in. And truthfully, before I started with emergency management, I didn't even know what my evacuation zone was. Here in Charlotte County, one of the interesting things that we have is on a lot of our stop signs, we actually have collars on our stop signs with different colors letting you know what evacuation zone you're in. So whenever you drive by your stop sign, if you see that colored band, whether it's red or orange or yellow, that's letting you know, hey, look, this is your evacuation zone. So as you're driving through your neighborhood and or other areas of Charlotte County, just kind of keep an eye out for those. Now, we did lose a lot of signs. We lost thousands and thousands of signs during Hurricane Ian. So a lot of those are going to be replaced in the next year or so because we did also lose the bands. But we do have more of those to be able to replace those.
Well, I'll tell you,
I didn't
Ellen,
even
this
know.
is Jody. I had an idea, but I double checked mine too. So as you were speaking, I was like, yeah, I probably ought to make sure of that zone.
And I'm certainly not the expert here, but I know something that I learned during Ian. My mom was actually spent a very long career in insurance, and I was discussing with her whether or not I should evacuate. She lives in New Jersey, and she thought that the evacuation zones were the same as the flood zones. So she was like, "Oh, you're in flood zone D, you'll be fine," because D is like way the heck up there. But evacuation zones are not the same as flood zones. We figured out.
They are very, very different. And in fact, our office directs you to community development, to our floodplain manager whenever you start calling and saying, what flood zone am I in? I need this for this or that. We actually send you to a completely different department than us to work with that office to get the correct information and how the floodplain management and things like that work. So yes, it is very different. One has to do with floodplain management, and where ours is strictly that map that you see. So let me go back to okay, right here, this map right here, this is actually called the storm surge inundation map, right? So a lot of times people are like, oh, well, it's the exact evacuation zone. But whenever we go to pick it up on our side, it says the storm surge inundation map. And what that's telling us is that's we get that information from FEMA and other departments that really look at stuff that's outside of our office to be able to give us that information on how storm surge will impact our community.
Awesome. And we did get a few responses. Thank you to those of you who responded. Most people the people that responded knew their flood zones, but they got it from the resources that you provided. So thank you for that. All right. I think that being said, we don't have any additional questions. So thank you, Ellen, for your time. And thank you, everybody else, for attending. We will try to get this recording posted as soon as possible, and we will post it on our social media page and share it with Ellen. And we'll likely bring it back if we see any storms, which hopefully we don't this year. At least nothing to the magnitude of Ian, for sure.
Make sure you pick up your hurricane guides at your local libraries or rec centers.
And the extension office is at a rec center, so you're always welcome to come visit. Cool. Alrighty. Well, thank you all so much, and we hope to see some of you again next week.